In 1929, when Maisie Ward was just 17, she met the first love of her life, Wilhelm, a German engineer working on the Ardnacrusher project. Young as she was, she fell in love with this man 10 years her senior, and when, just a few months later, he had to return to Germany, she married him, and left Limerick for a new life as part of an aristocratic German family. In the 30s, she says, life in Germany was wonderful. Even that fellow Hitler wasn't too bad.
Now, he started off well. Actually, it's a little bit deeper to go into that, but we can't go into it now. He started building all roads, repairing roads, done everything wonderful for the country, you know. Whether this was, I don't know now whether he had his eye on the war at that time, you know, but he was very, very good at the start.
The war, of course, did come, and a couple of years into it, Wilhelm was called up and went off to the front. Maisie and her 2 children were moved from Peenemünde further up the Baltic coast in an effort to escape the nightly bombing. Life was difficult. From an aristocratic table, Maisie was now queuing for ration coupons and food. Soon, contact with her husband at the front ceased, and she sent a note with a friend going to Berlin asking for information. The news wasn't good.
What they said, presumed dead, and they had no news. It was later on I found out how, and that he had been on the Russian front.
The death of her husband was just the beginning of Maisie's troubles. As well as bombings every night, the mayor of the town took a liking to her. He quickly began to dislike her, though, when she spurned his advances. It became difficult for Maisie to feed her children.
He fell in love with me and wanted me to have dinner and go out with him and so on. I couldn't be bothered. I had other worries on my mind. So suddenly I began to get the coupons. Instead of every week, I wouldn't get them until every fortnight. I had a lot of difficulty over that. So I went to the town hall and asked for the man that was above him in rank. And I said, why have I all those difficulties? Well, you see, we don't know what you are, whether you're English or Irish, and not even German now. You see, through the death of your husband.
The mayor had to be beaten, so a marriage was arranged with Kurt, her brother-in-law, who was fighting on the Russian front. The plan was suggested by his sister.
And she said, well, look, you know Kurt. Kurt was always a little bit in love with you. He's on the front, and we could arrange a marriage by proxy, and you'd be married again to a German. And I said, could we do that? She said, we could, and we did. And I got my papers back, and I thought I was now Mrs. Kronenberg. That was his name.
Maisie got her rations, but she only got 8 good days out of her second marriage. Her new husband requested and was granted compassionate leave. The news came that he was coming home from Russia.
He came back for 8 days, and things were all up a bit in the heat, the bombing and everything. But anyway, he went back, and 9 months later my youngest son was born.
Kurt went back to the front and was promptly killed. Soon after his death, Maisie was called to the town hall to answer questions about Ireland. At least, that's what she was told. In reality, she was about to be thrown into a concentration camp.
So when I opened the door, he was sitting there with his hands crossed and a sardonic smile on his face. And the next thing I saw 2 SS at one side of him and 2 Gestapo at the other. And I thought, oh, good God, what's this all about? And then the old brain got right. When I meet with very, very difficult troubles, I get very calm. And I was prepared for it. Didn't matter what came now.
And what did they actually charge you with?
Listening to the BBC and told me what it was. I knew myself what it was, that you'd be sent immediately to concentration camp. And if you spread the news, you could be killed, death sentence.
The charges were denied, but Maisie ended up in a concentration camp anyway. Not a nice place to be by all accounts.
And the next thing I was handed a bucket full of water and a scrubbing brush and a cloth, and said, one of them said, see that long corridor? You scrub that now from one end to the other.
And this was every day?
This was all day, every day. And then I said to the commandant, I want a court hearing over this. He said, don't be silly. If you're a prisoner here and you have no right. I said, I have to forget I'm not German and I'm not English. I'm not an enemy of your country. I said, and I demand it. And I remember saying it. I know what put into my head. And if I don't get one, Devil will be after you. I remember saying that well.
So Maisie went to court, but she had her defence planned. She asked an officer to speak to the main prosecution witness in English.
So I said to the judge, are you satisfied that this lady doesn't understand English? She said, well, it's quite obvious that she doesn't. And I said, would you ask her, please? And she said, yes, I know it was English, but I didn't know what the man was saying, you see. And I said, that is my point, my lord. I said, I wasn't telling Mrs. Welde was her name, Mrs. Welde, about what I heard from the BBC. I was telling her what Lord Haw Haw was saying, because he gave all his news in English for the Germans. And I said, and the judge said, that's that.
Soon Maisie was on the move again, this time to a town just across the water from Sweden. It wasn't long before the Russians were on the way.
People were running mad around the place. The women were frightened. They're raping everybody all around. They're 800 miles, they're 600 miles, they're 4. And at last then they said, they're only 400 miles now. They'll be here in half an hour. The Russian soldiers. They had come from Berlin.
When the Russians came to town, Maisie and other young women went into hiding. It was while hiding in the attic that a young girl left a tooth scar on Maisie's hand as she tried to suppress the girl's scream. Maisie had had enough. She dressed up, making herself look old, and went downstairs, revolver hidden under her clothes, and she waited for the next couple of Russian visitors.
So I opened the door and I saw those two yellow-faced, slitty-eyed young fellas about 18 years of age. And they kept shouting, frown, 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 women, 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 we want women. And they pushed me by side and they went through the hall and they ended up in the landlady's kitchen and they asked her too and she said, all women in Berlin. So they went upstairs and we kept our fingers crossed that the others wouldn't make noise upstairs, you know. And they came down and they started little comments. And nothing, I knew they were talking about me.
They realised that you weren't as old as you looked, yes.
And they started walking around me and they had me turning around after them. And then one of them grabbed the scarf from my head. And then they started laughing. They burst out laughing and they were delighted then. So then I indicated to them to get out, show them the hallway, you know. And they wouldn't go, so they said to me, half in Russian and half in German, that I was to come into bed with them. And I pretended that I didn't know what they were saying, so I remember them putting their two hands under the side of their face and nodding towards the bedroom. And I thought, now I've had it. So I pulled out the revolver then out of the and I wouldn't have even shot them because my hand was going like that. And but I got a fright, but I gave them a worse fright.
When the Russians departed, the ladies waited for reaction. It wasn't long coming. They got a visit from the local town commandant and a general.
And he said to me, where is the German bitch that threatened my soldiers? And that got me going now. And I said, no German bitch threatened your shoulders. It was an Irish woman. Because your soldiers threatened me with rape. And the next thing is, so was you, he said. I said, yes. So the next thing I got a punch in the face. And I was put flying back the hall through the door. And I really saw spots. And I jumped up and I made for him. I ran out the hall quicker than ever. He punched me forward. I ran quicker back, but the two soldiers came behind him and caught me. He said, you're coming to prison now and you'll pay for this, he said.
But the general stepped in and protected her and made sure she and her friends had plenty of food. But his reason for the help was a problem. Yet another man had fallen in love with Maisie. And so she ran away again, this time to Berlin, with hopes of getting back to Ireland.
And I went to the two embassies there, hoping I'd get some help to get out. And the English told me they couldn't help me, and the Americans told me they couldn't help me because they were military and this was a civil matter with me. So I went out and I was crying. I could hardly see where I was going with tears. Next thing I heard some steps after me. Do you want to hear this? Mm-hmm. And there was a young man and he handed me a note. He said, go there and you'll get help. And I looked at it, the French embassy, and I said, how in the name of God can I expect the French to help me, and the English can't help me, and the Americans can't help me? He said, go there.
The French embassy did help. She was sent to Paris, and eventually, after she was thrown out of a refugee camp in Paris, French officers got Maisie onto a boat back to Ireland, from there to Limerick, and another marriage. But that's another story.
Well, I'm thinking of writing a next book. Anyway, it was wonderful to get back to Ireland again.